Hi. Thanks for having me back. It was quite a year for multifamilies. I think you're going to hear a lot of the same themes that we heard in Justin's presentation and some others today. So let me get oriented here. So sort of jumped right into it. What I want to go over today is I'm going to start with the numbers and some graphs. I'm going to go through that pretty quickly, so bear with me because we've got a lot of things to talk about. But I like to start out putting the different regions in some historical context. Then I'm going to talk specifically about the Portland area. I'm going to jump out, talk a little bit about Saco and Biddeford, Lewiston, Auburn, and then get into the rental market and some of the new development and on to the forecast. Let's see, sorry, I want to just go back to that slide. Here we go. So you can see the curve trend here going back to 2005 of where we are historically. What's interesting to notice both in sales volume and properties sold across the different towns is looking down to those bottom lines, Portland this year from last year is relatively flat, whereas the other towns, South Portland, Westbrook, Saco, Biddeford, and Lewiston, Auburn, are all up. I don't think this is an indication of anything negative going on in Portland. I think we're kind of at capacity. And again, Justin's talk reminded me of what we're feeling in the multifamily sector. What's really positive to see is the renewed activity in the other markets. Another perspective on this is median price, and we'll see here that Portland median price is up 9%, so not flat. It was just the volume and the transactions that were really flat. And again, all the other towns are up also, so very strong, healthy market with prices continuing to increase. I find what's interesting on this slide is the bottom line from 2005 to today, the median price. What do you notice? Only Portland is positive. All the other towns, their median pricing is still below 2005. So as hot as this market seems, it's helpful to get a little context. And I completely agree that I think we're probably going to be, this market is plateauing, but it would be nice to see some energy continue for a couple more years and let these other towns get the values up because they're finally just really underway these last year or two and try and get the values back up over the 2005 range. Click. Absorption rate is another view of this, of the market activity. And a lot of numbers, a lot of charts here, but if you want to spend some time looking at the bottom, what you can see is the number of properties that have been on the market over the years, going back to 2008, and then the rate of sales each month, and that translates down to the absorption rate, sort of how much inventory is on the market. And I've tried to highlight that in the blue squares down at the bottom. And basically, most of the towns have 2 to 3 months of inventory. That is not a lot of inventory. There's only a handful of properties on the market, and everybody seems to want to buy a multi right now. So very fast absorption rate. And although Lewiston, Auburn is at 8.5 months, if you look back to what it was in 2008, and I think I remember standing up here, it must have been 2009, looking back at 2008, they had 29 months of inventory. So dramatic improvement in all markets. And the last graph, sort of on the regions, is days on market. What you should take away from this is if you own and live in your multi-unit in Portland and you plan to sell, you should be packed and ready to go. Because it is going to be on the market for 9 days, and that's the average. So many properties, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, you put the property on the market, you have a couple days of showings, everyone comes through, you collect offers. We're seeing a lot of multiple offer situations, and in many cases, a lot of offers over asking price. So let's talk a little bit specifically about Portland. Everyone seems to want a multifamily. Investors, owner-occupants. I could take out my phone right now. I literally got an email at 11 o'clock last night from a buyer that I've never met saying, I want to buy a multi, can you help me? And then I got another email this morning while I was sitting here from a broker putting out sort of a call to other agents saying he's got a client looking for multis. And this just happens every day. I think the economy is doing well, people have some wealth, and small multis particularly are a great entry point for sort of average Joe owners who want to get into the investment market to break in. And so people are feeling good enough about the economy, they want to get a piece of the action, they want to get into real estate. It's putting a lot of buyer pressure on the market. All Portland is hot, but in the downtown particularly, but really all of Portland is very strong right now, and even flowing out to the other towns. And as I just mentioned, we're seeing a lot of multiple offers and a lot of situations with offers over asking price. Commercial market's really the same story, and by commercial and multifamily, what that means is units of 5 or greater. It's commercial financing. These are more investment grade. Their value is analyzed more on the basis of their cash flow. Investors are struggling to find inventory. Buyer motivation continues to push prices up, although not as fast as the previous year. We're going to look at some slides around that. Fewer big transactions this year, more in sort of the standard Portland range of 6 to 14 units. And here are some of the stats there. And what you can see is this crazy jump up in price per unit. I've been doing this for a bunch of years now up in front of you, and most years the price per unit of a commercial multi is $68,000, $72,000 a unit, $74,000 a unit. Last year it jumped up to $79,000. Well, this year it's almost $100,000 a unit, so that's a big jump. However, and what's I think most important is that the cap rate is really still the same. Portland was a 7 cap city for multis 2 years ago, and it was in 2016 too. So I think what we're seeing is the price increase is pushing the price per unit up. Go through some notable sales. Red Bank sold 620 units for $87.5 million. Joe Porta Bullis brokered that deal. The Ambassador sold to Port Properties. It's 86 units downtown for $7.3 million. Joe Porta and Vince Ciampi brokered that. And then we've got a bunch of sort of standard downtown Portland buildings. An 11 unit down on Grand Street for $100 a unit. Veranda Street for $111 a unit. State Street for $125 a unit. These are surprising numbers in my world for multi-units, for commercial multi-units. Another on Grand Street and one on Cumberland Ave for $81 a unit. So that was an active market, but we're seeing sellers really take advantage of the pricing. A couple of these properties were only bought a few years ago, and the owners just realized that there had been enough appreciation a short amount of time and basically just took advantage and sold, take the profits. So let's step out to 2 to 4 units. Here's the average pricing this year. Average unit price is about $350,000. Average 3 unit is over $400,000, about $435,000, and that's a big jump we're going to see on the next slide. Put this in a little context. So we're going to benchmark it back to 2005. 2 units and 3 units are the most important to look at. They're the most regular. A lot of these transact every year, so the data is more consistent. Don't spend much time on 4 units. But what we see is we're up pretty nicely from 2005, and then from 14 to 16, those 2 years we made a big jump. But from 15 to 16, those bars are a little closer together, and so maybe we're starting to see some flattening in pricing. So I guess we're kind of echoing what we're hearing from other people. Kevin Bunker was making that point in the MEREDA Index film. And dramatic price increase in the last 2 years, but maybe we're seeing a slowdown this year. So here are some sales that make my jaw drop that happened this year. It was a 3 unit up on the hill, sold for $787,600. It's a 3 unit. The barn pretty much needed to be torn down, and there were no water views. It was a nice property, but not quite condo ready. It's a 2 unit off the peninsula. This is a property I was fortunate enough to sell, and I think the anecdote here was interesting, is how hard it is for brokers to price properties in this market. This property for many years would have been about $4.25, and coming up to the listing, a couple months leading up to it, we were talking about $425, and the last minute I said, I think maybe $450. And then the week before it sold, there was a sale of a similar property for $470. So we went out and listed it for $475, $50,000 higher than I was thinking just a couple weeks before, and sold it for even more than that for $485. That's how dynamic this market is, how excited this market is. And that's for a special product. That is for a very nice property. People with money just want to put it somewhere safe, and this was a good example of that. Another 3 unit on the hill for over $700. 2 unit on the hill for over $600. We sold this also and just had to make up a price. There were really no comps. There were decks on the top with water views. There was just nothing like it. And so we're kind of looking at the condo market, we're looking at other multis, and just trying to figure out where the ground is. Beautiful 4 unit on the west end for over $1 million, and a 4 unit off peninsula for over $600,000. So the activity in the pricing, the high values are not related, not just downtown, but really all over Portland. So very quickly, I'm going to jump out to Saco and Biddeford to reiterate the fact that the sales volume is up 12%, median price is up 6%. I think healthy cap rate probably around 10 down there, and you can see the average price per unit, and the vacancy rate, I believe, is around 5 to 7%. Lewiston, Auburn, also really finally some liquidity in this market. Sales volume up 24% is just great. Transactions are up 16%, and the median price is up. Cap rates are probably all over the board there, but probably 10, 11, 12. And you can see the average price per unit. Talking to some brokers up there, it sounds like they use 10 to 15% for a vacancy rate. So here locally, in our local municipalities, what landlords were thinking about, what was making the headlines every day, were our city councils responding to what is considered a tight housing market. And you probably remember the Press Herald doing a series almost 2 years ago now saying no vacancy in such a tight rental market. So Portland formed a housing super committee. South Portland has a housing task force. And then ironically, Westbrook almost considered a moratorium on new construction. Some of the things that were being proposed and considered were rent control, extending the notice to vacate for tenants at will from 30 days to 90 days. And Mayor Strimling thought it would be a nice idea to force all landlords and tenants into a one-year lease, whether they wanted it or not. Fortunately, most of these things, none of those things passed, and we worked with the city council and have some very sort of modest and reasonable implementations, because every expert that talks to all these task forces and all these councils says what we in this room know, which is you solve housing shortage by creating more housing, not by creating disincentives to housing. At the moment, they're thinking about short-term rentals, so if you've got a horse in this race and care, you should be paying attention, because the recommendation just went from the Housing Committee to the Council, and it is sort of game on with this, and some rules are probably going to get set in place. I won't go into them all now, but that's sort of the topic of the moment in Portland. So the irony, as they were thinking about rent control, is if we were watching the paper this year, these were the kind of headlines that were coming out. It was about all the new development that was happening. So let's get into what's going on in the city and some of the new development that's come online at the end of 2016 and is coming online early in 2017. We got 53 market rate units down in East Bayside on Anderson Street. They're about 65% full down there. Schlotterbeck and Foss is just coming online. They're going to be filling 55 units there. Out on Pleasant Ave by Woodford's Corner, there's a gorgeous adaptive reuse where they put in 25 units into this John Calvin Stevens building, and they're just starting to lease that up. That is also for sale. And Joe's Smoke Shop, which will be starting to lease up in February and occupy in June, they're saying, has 131 units. And tucked in out at Morrill's Corner is another 30. So my numbers look like this. That's about 294 units just on this page. These are just market rate units. There are also a couple low-income projects going on in the city. But if we take out some units that were lost to condo conversions, we're still putting in about 264 units. There's about 18,600 units in the city of Portland. So this is only adding about 1.5% to the total housing stock in Portland. So this is, it seems like a lot. It's going to be really interesting to watch the absorption, but we should not be overwhelmed by this. I think the developer's a little nervous about filling up 130 units, but I think we're going to get there. What's adding to the story is all the stuff going on around Portland. And so in Westbrook, they've already done 98 units, and they've got another 96 coming that threaten the moratorium. Interesting to note, the rental manager out there said that 32% of those tenants are coming from Portland. In South Portland, they've got another 118 on the way, 8 at a project on Hoyt Street. Cumberland's got 96 units being built as we speak. I think that's more units than they have in the town total right now. And Scarborough's got at least 54 units out at Eastern Village. So there's almost another 500 in the immediate surrounding. And these are filling pretty quickly. So I think we had a tight housing market. We're getting some construction. I don't think we're to the point of overbuilding. I think we've got to watch the absorption. But these numbers are not crazy. The numbers of units that are coming on feel like a lot, but I think they're going to be absorbed all right. So one Portland rental manager said, Portland has hit its limits, rent increases are slowing, and it takes longer to find good tenants. I polled my landlord group on Tuesday, and I think most people in the room agreed with that sentiment. The Westbrook manager says our units fill as fast as we can build them. So I think we're figuring out sort of where we are, and maybe some of it is a need for some different product, because those units are building out in Westbrook. They're filling 12 units a month as quickly as they can build them. I do think as a community we need to be careful. Talk about things like rent control is noticed. I was getting calls from developers and investors in Boston and New York when that talk was going on, calling up to me and saying, what the hell's going on up there? What are you guys thinking? And so that kind of talk can discourage exactly the kind of development we need. Here are my rental numbers for the year. I think we're pretty flat, and Kevin was saying it in the film. I think rents are plateauing. I think if you talk to landlords on the ground, that's what they're feeling. I don't think they're going down, and I don't think we're overbuilding, but we're not seeing the kind of increases we were seeing before. We're in line with Section 8 rentals, and the new construction is higher. So those numbers in the lighter blue that I'm saying are average mid-grade, those are sort of the best I can estimate, or just sort of the basic unit, basic sort of Portland unit, not the new stuff, not fancy, not covered parking and all that. But so we've got more strata in Portland, we've got more different price points, more types of units available. And I think today the vacancy is still very low. I think it's still approaching 0%, but we're feeling the shift as the rent increases slow down, and as maybe we're feeling a little shift in tenant quality. So future stuff I'm going to go through quickly. Rufus Deering is talking about 300 units in terms of what else might be coming. Those are probably not just rentals, but certainly a lot of units there. 28 units are happening on Congress Street. 54 are proposed down the West Bay side. The apartments on York Street, I've been told, are no longer going to be apartments. They're going to be condos. I think that is a great decision. In Midtown, I've had this on my slides, that picture, since 2013. It's still not there to take an actual picture of the building. So maybe that happens someday. And I think if Jim Brady and his partners can persevere through all the hurdles and sort of whack-a-mole that he has to deal with, and historic and planning and everything, and we get that beautiful asset down on the water, that will be adding a bunch of units to the city also. So to my forecast, I think Portland's going to stay strong. I think rising interest rates are going to be a consideration. We'll keep cap rates from decreasing anymore. I think we're going to stay at that 7%. Maybe they tick up. Price of 2 to 4 units may increase modestly. We still have a supply-demand imbalance, but it feels like the prices are starting to flatten out. And I think as buyers stop believing they can just buy a building and raise rents, they're going to be less exuberant about just paying anything for a building. I think the new rental units are going to be absorbed, but at a modest pace. And I think as the new rental units attract top-tier tenants, the average units, like all these 100-year-old buildings around the city, will also see a flattening in rents and maybe see a decrease in the tenant quality. Westbrook, I think, will continue to absorb their units, and as a whole will continue to increase as an attractive alternative to Portland. And Saukman Biddeford will also continue to do well. I think my last point I want to just mention here is I think what we're seeing as an agency is Portland is a fundamentally different city, and you heard some of the talk today about urbanization. We've got absolute numbers. We don't really have population growth. Who's going to take all these new units? Well, the dynamics are shifting, and Portland is a different city than it used to be, and people want to live downtown, want to stay here longer, and we really are on the map nationally and internationally as a destination. I think that helps the rental market. I personally think it helps the condo market more. So I think we should keep an eye on apartment development, because that's an area I feel like we could overproduce in. We still have sort of limited supply and limited people who actually work here and make a living here. I don't see a limit in the foreseeable future to people who want to come here and own property here from Boston, from Brooklyn, from DC. They come into our office and all agents in Portland wanting to have a part of what we have here in Portland. And really, we're limited by the inventory. So we could overbuild in that market, but at the current state, I feel actually better about the condo market than the apartments if new apartments are still proposed. I think what we've got on track right now is safe, though. So finally, overall, I think it's going to be another strong year, but slightly more sober year for sales and values. You see my little qualifier. I think it's interesting we have this forecast a day before a new president takes office who has never held a political position before. We'll see what happens. Certainly a hard market to forecast. So, thanks very much.